This is Jamie with Stonemaier Games, and today I'm going to delve into my top 10 favorite games with follow mechanisms and follow production. I've included them both together. The general idea of a follow mechanism is if I choose the build a building action, then every player gets to take that action or some variation of that action. And I'm including in this mechanism because it is so similar, and I think it has the same spirit of that traditional follow mechanism of follow production, which is when it's my turn, if I say roll some dice, that you get to use those dice as well for whatever you're producing in your tableau. So I'm going to combine those two things together, which really helped me because while there is one big upside to follow mechanisms, there are also some pretty big downsides. And so there are more games on my list that have follow production instead of follow actions. I'll get into that as I talk about these games. So some games on this list that might be on your list, but I haven't actually played in this category are Reavers of Midgard, San Juan, Glory to Rome. I know, I haven't played Glory to Rome. That's a big one. That's like one of the earliest games that use this mechanism. Lisboa, Heroes of Land, Air, and Sea, and Villages of Valeria. Some honorable mentions that didn't quite make the list. Some of these are huge games that people will absolutely love, but were just honorable mentions for me. Were the Gallerist, Race for the Galaxy, Roll for the Galaxy, Carnegie is a new one, Broom Service, Rising Sun, Fort, which is also pretty new, and Twilight Imperium IV edition uses the follow mechanism. So let's jump right into my top 10 list. And actually, before I jump in, I should say that none of the Stonemaier games that I could think of, my company, Stonemaier Games, has games with follow mechanisms. There's one little mechanism that kind of comes close to one of the games, but most of them do not. And there's a reason for that I'll get to in a second. But let's jump in with number 10, and that is Puerto Rico, which is one of the other originators, along with Glory to Rome, of this mechanism. In Puerto Rico, among many other things that you're doing, some of them controversial and unfortunate based on how they're portrayed in the game, you are choosing an action, and other players can also follow along and do a weakened version of that action. Or rather, everyone gets the action. If you're the one that chooses it on your turn, you get a bonus. And so that feels good, that you're choosing an action and you get a bonus. And this is one of the pros, I would say, to this mechanism, that not only are you choosing it for yourself and hopefully getting something extra good because you're the one that chose it, but you're also trying to figure out what either what doesn't benefit the other players all that much at that moment, or what you think the other players are going to choose so that you don't have to use your turn to do that thing because you think that someone else is going to do it. That's a very interesting form of player interaction, a reason to pay attention to the other players at the table, even though you're not directly hurting those players. So that's Puerto Rico at my number 10 slot, using this follow mechanism. At number 9 is Tiny Epic Galaxies. This is my favorite of the Tiny Epic series. And in Tiny Epic Galaxies, actually does a really nice twist on this follow mechanism, which is that you're going to roll some dice, you're going to choose one of them to implement an action based on what's on that die. And other players can also take that action if they spend a culture. So the game adds a resource that you need to have to be able to follow other players. And I think that's really, really clever. And I like the thematic touch of culture for that use in this game. So that's really nice. You get to do something when it's not your turn, as long as you have culture to spend to be able to do it, to be able to copy that action when it's not your turn. So that's Tiny Epic Galaxies, an interesting implementation of it there. The next is another Valeria game, the Valeria game that I have played, and that is Valeria Card Kingdoms. This is at the number 8 spot on this list. The other one that I mentioned, Villages of Valeria, also uses a follow mechanism, but in Valeria Card Kingdoms, it uses the follow production mechanism. In that, if it's my turn, and you'll see this a few times on this list, if it's my turn, I'm going to roll 2 dice. I believe it's 2 dice. It's been a while since I played, but you roll 2 dice, and I get to use, I get to trigger cards that I have that have each of the numbers on each of those dice. So if I roll a 1 and a 6, I get to trigger all cards with a 1, also all cards with a 6. And the nice twist in Valeria is I also get to trigger all cards with the sum of those numbers, 7. Again, it's been a while since I played. I can't remember if all players get all 3 of those triggers or if the benefit is on your turn that you get all 3 of those. But I do like the twist that you're getting each individual die and the sum of the 2 dice to trigger the cards in your tableau. And all of the ideas that other players get to use those dice as well to trigger their cards. That is Valeria Card Kingdoms at number 8. And number 7 is the first of the games on the list that I actually own, and this is Catan, specifically Cities and Night. I haven't played Catan in a long time, but if I do play Catan, Cities and Knights is the version of it that I want to play. And Catan is perhaps the earliest version of follow production that at least I can think of. Because in Catan, one player is rolling some dice, and all players get to produce based on hexes on the board where they have a settlement or they have an upgraded building. They get to produce depending on the number on that die. And Cities and Knights adds a nice twist to that in that there are more than the basic resources that you're gaining. Basically, if you have an upgraded building next to one of those hexes, then you get an upgraded resource as a result of rolling those dice as well. So that's a nice little twist. At number 6 on the list, I have Machi Koro Legacy. Specifically, the Legacy version, as I just said, not the standard version. The standard version is fine, but I really liked the story that the Legacy version told and how certain elements evolved over time in ways that essentially let you fix parts of the game that you don't really enjoy or focus on parts of the game that you really do enjoy in Machi Koro Legacy. The core aspect of Machi Koro is that you are rolling, similar to Valeria Card Kingdoms. One player is rolling some dice, and all players get to use those dice if they have a certain color of card that gets to use those dice. I have one other game that I'll mention in that category in a moment, so I won't spend too much time on Machi Koro at number 6. At number 5, I have probably the highest game on this list that uses... No, there's one of them that's a little bit higher, but Eminent Domain is my number 5, and this uses the more traditional follow mechanism, where in Eminent Domain, you are choosing a core action to use on your turn, and all other players also get to use that action. Yeah, and this is a great implementation of it. So it's both a deck building game and a follow game. So it leans into one of the big pros of the follow mechanism, which is that all players are involved, even when it's not their turn. There's very little downtime in these games because you're always doing something. Even if it's not your turn, you are moving forward. You're making progress in the game. That feels really, really good. And I think Eminent Domain does that really well. That's Eminent Domain at number 5. Number 4 is Tiny Towns. This is getting up in the part of the list where I've played these games a fair amount of times. I really do enjoy Tiny Towns. It is a combination of a couple different types of games. In addition to the core mechanism that I'm talking about today, it also has a match 3 mechanism, or uses the match 3 mechanism from mobile games, in that you are placing cubes on a grid, and when those cubes are specific colors and specific configurations, line up based on how you've placed them, you get to pull them all up and put a building down on one of the spaces where there was a cube. So you're kind of filling up this board, and then suddenly you're cleaning it up and leaving only one of those squares covered with a nice building as a result. That feels really, really good. But the way that you're putting those squares down is that when it's your turn, you are the one that gets to choose which cube type you're going to put down on the board. And so that feels really good. On your turn, you have control. You have control over which cube you really need at that moment for your board. And you get to select it and put it wherever you want. But at the same time, it feels really good, or it has this nice positive feel, because not only are you choosing it for yourself, but you're also choosing it for other players. If other players were looking for that red cube, you get to be the one who provides it without really doing anything. You just get to pick that red cube. And I think that feels really good. That's one of the other really nice things about the follow mechanism, that when you choose an action that other players want, that feels really good for everybody. It's this nice form of positive player interaction. And I really like how Tiny Towns does that in such a simple way. You're just choosing a cube color to put on your board. So that's Tiny Towns at number 4. And number 3 is a game that I have and really enjoy, and that is the roll and write game, That's Pretty Clever, or Ganz, Schon Clever. Of course, I will mispronounce that, but let's just call it That's Pretty Clever here. In this game, and this actually has a really nice twist on it, because in this game, when it's your turn, you are rolling some dice, and you're picking, picking a few of those dice. I don't remember exactly how many. It's either 2 or 3. You're picking a few of those dice to use for yourself, so you get to feel really powerful on your turn. However, the dice that you don't choose are available for all other players to use, and not to draft, just to use. So I believe there are 3 dice left over after I've picked my dice. And every other player simultaneously gets to choose one of those dice that they want to use. So all the players could use, say, the green die. If the green die is left over, all of them could use that one die. They're not claiming it from the middle like I'm doing when it's actually my turn. But it's kind of flipped this on the head a little bit, because instead of like in Tiny Epic Galaxies, I'm choosing one of my dice, I'm choosing that die, and all of the players get to use it. In this case, I'm choosing the dice that I want for myself, and in that way, I'm choosing the dice that all other players have access to as a result. I think that's a really, really clever twist. I get my own special thing. I get to feel special. I get to, in a way, take things away from other players. But at the same time, I get to give other players these 3 dice that I didn't even have access to. And that's fun. And that's the reason that one of the reasons that I really love. That's pretty clever. Ganz, Schon clever. At number 2, I have Dice Forge. Dice Forge is a wonderful game. It's a dice building game where you have these big chunky plastic dice and you're attaching new sides to that dice as you play. You're removing and then attaching new sides to those dice. And Dice Forge is one of these games where and actually as I'm saying this, I'm wondering if I shouldn't have put it on this list, because in Dice Forge, unlike these other games, you aren't actually sharing production. Instead of Dice Forge, all players are just rolling their dice on every turn. So I don't know. Too late to re-record this at this point. But Dice Forge maybe shouldn't have been on here because you are not actually sharing actions. You are not actually sharing production. Instead, you're all just doing something at the same time. I'm going to talk about it anyway. It's a game that I really love, but I'm kind of going to disqualify it for this particular list because you're not following along with anyone. Actually, I'll use this as an opportunity to talk about some of the downsides of these games before I jump into my number 1 real quick. One is they all require a game manager. A game manager is something I generally try to avoid in games. A game manager is when you need some player to always be saying, okay, is everybody ready? It's this person's turn. We have to all do this thing together now. You're managing the game for the other players. This can actually be nice in some cases when you have new players who like to be who like to just follow along. They like to follow along. They like to be led. But I think it greatly interrupts the flow of the game for that reason and the second reason, which is that when you have these follow actions, it can be fairly easy to forget whose turn it is. Like, have I finished my turn? Did you just finish your turn? You can forget if you've actually taken the benefit or not. I played one of these games the other day, and we were constantly forgetting, did I actually use your dice or did I not? Have I done that or not? And it can lead to some confusion, some frustration as a result. And it leads to some confusion, I think, as a result of whose turn it is. And the last thing is the thematics of it. I think some of these games do an okay job with the thematics, but why really are we all doing the same thing at the same time? Like if I'm deciding, in the example I gave earlier, if I'm deciding that it's time for me to build a house, why does everyone else get to follow along with that? We're not really sharing resources to build this house. I'm building a house. You are separately building a house. Why are we following each other for that purpose? Maybe there's some thematic justifications in these games that designers can speak to, but it's one of those things that I just try not to think about because I think without that the mechanism works pretty well, especially follow production. But I think there's a downside there in terms of the theme. Anyway, enough about game design. Let's talk about my number 1 game on this list, and that is Space Base. Space Base is actually a game that I just played this past weekend. I played it many, many times. I'm always excited to play Space Base. And it has a couple things that I think really elevate it from the other follow production versions of these different games. One is that Space Base is full of feel-good moments. You're always getting more stuff. When other players are rolling, when you're rolling. And one of the keys to that is from the very beginning of the game, you have cards numbered 1 through 12. You have them all. You have all these cards ready to use. So that feels really good. You're not kind of slowly acquiring them over the course of the game. It requires a little bit more setup, but it's really not that much time at all. So that feels really good. Right from the start of the game, you have all these cards to use. And as you replace those cards, so as I get another card that has the number 12 on it, say, I then get to flip my previous number 12 card over, slot it in above my board, and it then becomes a card that can trigger when other players are rolling. So the game gives you a huge reason to upgrade a wide variety of cards in your tableau, because every time you upgrade a card, you then have a card that triggers when it's not your turn. And that feels really, really good. The other nice little twist, I think, in Space Base is that you have a choice. You can either take the benefits of both dice that are rolled, they're standard D6 dice, you get the benefits of both dice that are rolled, or you can add them together. So it's a little twist on the Valeria card kingdom system. I don't actually know which one came first, but it's really nice that you have that choice, because it means that you can focus on lower number cards if you want and just hardly ever add the dice together. Or you can focus on a little bit of the two, a little bit of mix of lower number cards and higher number cards. And when you hit that higher number, it can feel really, really good. But it just gives you a lot of flexibility so that you always have something good happening. There are very few dead turns in Space Base. Especially when it's your turn, you are guaranteed to hit something on your turn and hit multiple things if you choose both dice. And overall, I just have a lot of fun playing Space Base. So it's these mechanisms and other elements of the game that I think I just feel good to me as I play. So those are my favorite examples of follow actions and follow production. I would love to hear which of these are on your list and which of the games that I haven't played you would highly recommend based on what I've said here, and which of the games that I put in my honorable mention you would put in your top 10, and perhaps even games that I've missed that you would elevate. And if you also have any pros and cons that you want to mention, I'd love to hear about them from a design perspective as well. All right, thanks.